In this tutorial, I'll show you how to take your Space Marine helmet from this to this as we use sculpting to add in battle damage. So what I want to do first is I just want to select everything in the scene, so the reference images, just our main helmet model, and that's just about it. I don't want to bring across all the booleans and Shrinkwraps and all that. So just select everything with A, Control-C, and this is just the copy attributes menu, so it's just a free add-on that you can add in. I find it rather helpful. So we'll just go Copy Objects, we'll go Control-N, we'll just open up a new file. Delete everything in the startup file and Control-V to paste everything in. And that's just going to help reduce some of the bloat for this file, because this file will probably get a bit heavy. And it seems to have brought across a Boolean mesh, so I'm just going to delete that. And now we just want to sort out our high and low poly meshes, because our high poly mesh in this instance is actually going to be a sculpted mesh with a fair bit of detail in it, which will be nice. So let's just start to clean things up here. So this has still got a shrink wrap on it, so I'm just going to drag this to the top of the stack and apply it. And I'm just going to turn off these subdivs just to make everything a little bit more performant. I'm going to delete that instance of the screw because we don't need it anymore. For these tubes, we don't need all of these modifiers anymore, so I'm just going to apply the array and the curve, and I'm just going to turn the subdiv off. And that means we can delete our curve in here that was driving it. This has already got the subdiv turned off, so that's handy. We can just hide that. Our faceplate, I'm going to leave this as is, but we can just turn the subdiv off. Turn the subdiv off on the main helmet as well. And I don't know why these have got a bevel modifier on them. And we can probably just leave the eye pieces like that. And then for the bolts here, I'm just going to... Did we UV these at all? Definitely not. That's alright. I reckon we just join them all together though. So just select all these, Control J, and now they're all a singular mesh. Oops. Alright, cool. So I just wanted to disable all of the subdivs just to make everything a little bit more performant. So what we can do now is let's just label everything. So we'll just go helmet underscore LP. Oops, because this is going to be a low poly. We'll just call this one skull underscore LP. We can go screws underscore LP. We'll probably end up combining all these later on, but at the moment I just want to keep them separate objects. Let's go visor underscore LP, even though that's probably the wrong term for it. Faceplate underscore LP. Actually, let's add the tubing and these little bits to it. So I'm going to select the little vents at the back, the tubing, and then select the faceplate, Control J, and join all that together. Just make things a little bit easier and more coherent. Alright, cool. So now we've got like our low poly mesh kind of sorted, not entirely, but it's kind of there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all these. I'm just going to go Shift D, and with the duplicate instances, I'm just going to press M, move these to a new collection and call this one high poly. So we'll create that. And then I'm just going to hide that one, select everything here for our low poly, M, new collection, and call this one low poly. And create that. That should just help a little bit with our organization, and we don't really want to touch the low poly for anything we're doing in this tutorial. Cool, so we just want to work on this high poly mesh, and I think we're only really going to be sculpting the skull, the main portion of the helmet, and sort of the main faceplate here. So, yeah, we're not really... Well, that kind of is everything. But yeah, you'll see what I mean about what we're sculpting later. So, regarding the sculpting, there's a free set of rock brushes over on Gumroad here. And even though they are rock brushes, they actually work quite well for the metal damage sculpting that we're going to be doing. So you can get these for free, or you can name a fair price and donate to Brandon Funk if you'd like. But once you download these, you can just go ahead and chuck them into... we'll just extract the sculpting tools, and then you'll have all of the textures here, as well as all the base textures for us to use. And so let's get a bit of practice in with these. So for this high poly mesh, what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to remove the faceplate here, because we're not going to sculpt on the tubes and all that here. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide everything but the faceplate, just so we can work on that. And for this, what we're going to do is we're actually going to apply all of these modifiers. So just Control A, Control A, Control A. And so now that's all applied. And so we'll do a bit of practice just by getting this little bit of detail sculpted in here. And I thought just to mention as well, it's handy to have the low poly as kind of a backup because I actually just screwed up one of my instances of recording and just pulled that back in so that I could undo all the sculpting work that I screwed up. But anyway, so let's tab into sculpt mode here. And what we're going to do first and foremost is we're just going to enable dim topo. Say okay to that. And I'm going to change this from, I think normally it's set to relative detail. Sorry, I didn't change this back. But I kind of prefer working with constant detail and then bumping this resolution up. I think it starts at like 12 or something like that. But bumping this up to 100. I think this works pretty well. You're going to see very quickly I'm not a very competent sculptor. But I think this method works well enough. But please, if you're a better sculptor than myself or understand this better than me, please let me know ways that I can improve, because this is just some method that I hacked together back in like 2022. And it works modestly well, I think. So, but anyway, let's go to our clay strips brush here and just change it from being positive to negative so we actually cut into the mesh. And I'm just going to use F to bring down the size of the brush a little bit here. And I'm just going to do some rather quick little clicks and drags just to sort of block out the rough shape of what I think I can see on the reference here. So just try to fill all of that in. And then once we've done that, so we've got the general shape defined here, we don't really need to use the reference. We can start to come through maybe with like, a bit of a bigger brush to carve out the middle piece here. So do that. And then, whoops, change the brush by accident. We can sort of scale this down and sort of cut in some finer detail to get those scratches. Also, sorry, something I forgot to mention between my two recordings. Just turn off the move gizmo if you've got it enabled, because it's really annoying if you accidentally grab this while you're sculpting. It just starts to lag, and it's really just a bit of a nuisance. So just turn that off. Save you a bit of a headache, because I've done that many times. So we'll just come through here, just very, very roughly and muddily sort of carving this in. So for what it's worth, I think this is all right for the time being. It's nothing fantastic. As I said, I'm not a good sculptor. But to kind of help with, some of the extremities of our sculpting here, it's a bit too square, so it kind of wants to pinch it back together. And I find this pinch and magnify brush works quite well for that. So I'm just going to press F to scale up my influence. And I'm just going to sort of pinch this into the end a little bit here. So just make it a little bit less squared out. Maybe do the same for the top here. A little bit over this side. And down the bottom here. Just kind of like that. I think it makes it look a little bit more believable. It also sort of warps the outer topology a bit, which I kind of feel like you can justify given if there's been metal impact, it's probably, warped and distorted the metal a bit. I'm probably just trying to justify sculpting errors, but it's fine, I think, right? So yeah, once we've done that, we can come through and, we can just kind of try to use a bit of a smaller clay strips brush and just sort of define these areas a little bit better if we want. And then, once you've got something, if you wanted to add, if you held down control and you sort of wanted to add a little bit more height and variation through here for, more like the damaged metal effect, you can certainly do that. But once I get to somewhere like here, I think this is all right, and it looks pretty good at a distance. But to add just a little bit more detail, a little bit more rough and tough of the metal being destroyed, if we go to our draw brush here, and I don't think I would have undone, no, I didn't. So I'll just get rid of that. So if we go to our draw brush, just pretend you didn't see that. And we once again set it to negative. We can bring in image texture here. So if we just press N on the N panel, go to our tool settings, and we can just add a new brush texture. And then in our brush type, in our texture properties here, we can just go ahead, open. We can find those texture brushes that we downloaded earlier. And I quite like Mountain Texture 17. I think it looks quite nice. So we'll just load that in. And then if we just do a handful of quick clicks in here, you notice it starts to decimate our mesh a little bit. So I'll probably push that in too far. So I might just control and click just to bring this up and out a little bit. And yeah, so you can just go through and kind of decimate the mesh a little bit more. You can definitely probably get better results using something like relative detail here, no doubt. As I said, I'm just not very confident when it comes to doing the sculpting, which is probably a bit rich in the fact that I'm then trying to teach it. But I think this works well enough for the results that we want. Because this will bake down into a normal map, and you're kind of going to see it at a distance as well. And I think it looks somewhat nice. It's probably a little bit too noisy here at the moment, but what we can do is on our smooth brush, if you just bring the strength down, I think by default it's at like 0.7, but if you just bring it down to 0.2, and then we can go back to our draw brush. If you hold down shift using any other brush, it will use your smooth brush. So we can just go ahead, we can try to like smooth some of that detail out just so it doesn't look so noisy at a distance, because, this is where we're going to be viewing things from, right? And then, for the edges, we could probably harden those up a little bit, and I think you do that using, is it the crease polish brush? I think, do you run it along the edges of this? Yeah, I think this just kind of helps tighten up the edges a little bit for us. Once again, as I said, not a great sculptor, but I think this just marginally works. And so, yeah, then we end up with something like this. And at the moment, I don't think there's enough depth in there. So I'm just going to grab my clay strips brush. And I'm just going to kind of dent some of this in a little bit again. Just like that. So, yeah, look, for what it's worth, I think that looks pretty all right. But, yeah, that's the general process that we're going to be applying to the other little dings and scratches along the model. So I won't go into great depth about all of them, because otherwise we'll be here for hours and hours, but that's the general process we're going to use, and I'll sort of just skip over a handful of the other ones that we'll do as we continue along. But the next part that I will run you through entirely is just doing the skull, because this one's, I think, a little bit easier. So we'll just come to our modifiers, we'll just apply the subdiv, so we've got a little bit more topology to work with. And I'm just going to isolate this. I'm not really going to use any of the original reference for this. We'll just go into sculpt mode here. And I find for the skull here, using the scrape and fill brush actually works quite nicely. So I'm just going to bring this down. And it's Warhammer, so I feel like we can kind of get away with a lot more damage being applied to everything. I'm also just going to bring the strength down to 0.3. And so we can just start to use the scrape tool. Okay, maybe we do want this at 0.7. Use the scrape tool. Yeah, there we go. And we can just kind of like damage up all these edges a bit. Like, flatten them out, look like it's all been worn and torn and everything. Make it look, less nice and neat and uniform and whatever. So we can just go ahead. I'm just going to kind of do this to almost all the edges along this skull. It's probably overkill, but as I said, I kind of feel like for a Warhammer asset, you can kind of justify it. So, just going to go ahead. It doesn't need to be absolutely everywhere, but I'm just going to kind of beat up the edges a little bit more. Same with the teeth and all that as well. Just kind of, make it look less like it's just been newly manufactured. I'll just hold down shift and smooth that out. Yeah, so just little bits and pieces going on down here. Same with the bottom of the teeth. These are probably a little bit too clean. And we can also use other sculpting tools here as well. So I think the crease sharp, I think this looks quite nice if we just wanted to do like, a big dent through the front of the teeth here or something like that as well. So then, I might come through and smooth that out. Might be a bit intense. But, just to add a little bit more variation, a little bit more style, and you don't have to follow what I'm doing here. I think this is why this process is a lot of fun, because you can make your high poly sculpt completely unique and get your own look. Another thing I noticed when we sort of did the model is that the I don't know what you call it, but the creasing from the teeth and around the brow here, it's not really that well defined. And I think using the crease polish brush and sort of just like going up and around, sort of just following that general guide, kind of helps to sort of define it a little bit better. And for this one, actually, because I don't want to do it twice over, I'm just going to go ahead and enable the X mirroring symmetry. And that's going to work because this is along the X axis. If you modeled it along the Y axis or something, then you'll just need to use the respective symmetry lines. So I'm just going to do that, because now you can see it's mirroring the detail across, and I don't really want to have to do this twice over. Also, I'm not using din topo for this one because I think it's subdivided highly enough for how you can see this mesh overall. So that's probably a bit too intense, so I'm just going to hold down shift and sort of just smooth some of that out. Just go through, do some rapid successions of sort of doing that. Yeah, so I might have done this a little bit too much, but that's alright. And then, probably not going to do the symmetry here, but yeah, I might just crease up sort of the front here, just give it more of a menacing sort of look as it comes into the teeth. I don't really know proper anatomical structures, so forgive me if this is just all wrong. I just don't want to distort the edges too much, so I don't want to do something like this, because then baking is just going to be an absolute nightmare. So I kind of want to keep the edges consistent the best I can. Sort of muddying them up with the scrape tool is alright, but I don't want to completely distort them, otherwise you will notice you'll have a bit of a headache to deal with when we get to the normal baking section. But I think just sort of adding in some of those crease lines through the front there, I think it just gives it maybe a little bit more of a menacing look. Might not. I might actually just increase the smooth brush a little bit here, so I might just bring this up to like 0.5, because I think these are probably a little bit too intense. So I might just smooth these out a little bit more, make them a little bit less noticeable, because I probably did that a bit too harshly there. Yeah, I think something like that looks a little bit nicer. And I might actually just do the same for the brows here. I probably made that a little bit too intense as well. So just smooth that out a little bit more. And I think for like the actual eyebrow parts here, I think we can use the scrape multiplane tool, and I think we can sort of just tighten these up a little bit as well. I'm not really sure if that's the intended use of it. I don't really know if that's what you'd want to do. If I smooth it out a bit. I don't know if that's made any positive effect or change or anything of the sort. And I don't know if just by running the smooth brush over the top just completely invalidates what we did. But yeah, so I'm just going to go through. I'm not going to waste much more of your time explaining this, because I think you'll get the general gist of what's happening. But yeah, just going through, mainly using the scrape tool to just sort of beat up the edges of everything like this. And you can't really go wrong. It's like, you know, whatever you think looks nice, that's going to work for your model, and you know, it helps make your model more unique. For the top here though, just one final thing, instead of it being like, you know, perfectly round and smooth, you can always come through with like your clay strips brush, and sort of, maybe not at that intensity, but maybe like 0.2, and sort of just start to, you know, muck up the top here and just make it a little bit less uniform. So, you know, just do some random sort of clay strip brushes and just sort of muddy everything up a bit. Maybe even just add a fair bit of a dent. Actually, you could add probably a better dent by using the draw brush, probably without a texture. So, you know, if we just wanted to add a big dent to the top of the skull there, do that. And then, you know, you could come through with your smooth brush, sort of just smooth a lot of this out. So it's sort of, you know, worn and distorted the top of the skull a little bit here, which will just add some more unique variation when it comes to the normal bake. And maybe just do like a bit of a pinch and magnify on this area. No, isn't there a different one that sort of, what is it? I swear there's one that sort of pushes things in on itself. Maybe it is the pinch and magnify and I'm just using it all wrong. I'm just going to leave it like that. And yeah, once again, sorry, you could also use like, you know, the crease sharp if you wanted to, you know, chuck a big scar on it, or, you know, some sort of dent line into it. Actually, that works quite nicely for adding like a bit of a dented hole into everything. But yeah, you've got the freedom to make this as unique as you want. So yeah, I'm just going to continue going around, just doing some more scrape lines on this, and then I'll bring you back to doing some more sculpting on the actual helmet itself. So, future me here, I just wanted to let you know that this took me around 3 hours to do, thus why I've time-lapsed much of the process. So please don't feel the need to do all of this in one sitting, because I certainly didn't. I do also cover some more important sculpting techniques and the modeling process for adding the damage states to the low poly mesh later on in the video, but I have timestamped these, so you can feel free to just jump to those sections if you'd like to get the main points of this video, and then you can just do the damage sculpting in your own time without watching me do it. So I'll leave you to it, but make sure to take breaks, chuck on a podcast or some music while you sculpt, and just enjoy the process. Alright, so I'm kind of happy with that. It's probably way too beaten up for what's necessary. But, you know, I think this kind of plays well into the Warhammer sort of stuff. Once again, that could just be a terrible justification for damaging a model too much. But what we can do with this skull, right, and we'll do something similar but different for our actual main low poly helmet. But what we can do here, so that the low poly skull actually sort of conforms a little bit better to things here, so I'm just going to isolate both of these, is we can do a shrink wrap here. So let's get a shrink wrap modifier, and I'm going to target it to our skull, should be, yeah, skull LP 0.001. And if we just hide our high poly here, what you'll notice is that if we just sort of toggle between these, it sort of distorts the look of our skull a little bit. But if we put the on cage on, you'll notice it sort of helps give some dents where there were none previously. So instead of it being like, you know, a perfectly rounded and smooth model, it sort of dents things up and sort of distorts some of our nice curves and hard edges that we had. Which will just help sort of sell the illusion of our normal map, so that the normal map isn't just trying to carry all this faked depth, and we're actually getting some proper depth integrated back into our model here. Which will come in handy later on. And so speaking of, let's go ahead, I'm just going to do some more sculpting passes on the high poly helmet here. Just similar to this, I'll just do another time lapse because I don't want this to be like a 3-hour long tutorial. But if you do want more detail on this, just let me know, and I'm happy to do something a little bit more in depth. I just don't want to bore everybody with this process. But what I am going to do for this is I'm just going to, before I apply, actually it's not going to make a whole lot of difference, is it? No, I'm just going to sculpt on this. It should be fine. So yeah, I'm going to apply the subdivision to this entire helmet here, and then I'm just going to go through and do some more sculpting. So I'll apply the mirror, apply the subdiv, and I'll just go through, do some more sculpting on the faceplate and the rest of the helmet. And then we'll go ahead and we'll modify the low poly mesh so that all the normal bakes look nice and we actually have some more depth on our low poly mesh as well. So I just thought to mention this part here, because I'm just going to use some masking here, just because as I was trying to sculpt and do a little bit of pinching here, I kept on messing up this area down here. But masking is a really handy way to restrict where you're sculpting to not affect areas that you don't want to. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to reduce the size of the influence here. And I just got to the masking tool by pressing M. So just your M key will go to your masking tool. And then you can just paint a mask around the area that you want to affect. Well, sorry, that you want to mask out. So at the moment, this will make sure that we can't actually sculpt here. So if I tried to do a brush stroke across here, you'll notice it's sculpting on everything but that surface. But we can, let me see, I know we can invert this. Is it like Control I? Yes, cool. So yeah, we can Control I to invert that mask. And then if we use our pinching tool now, I won't run into that same issue of trying to pinch this area and also subsequently screw up the nice creased edges below. So just sort of crease that up a bit. And there we go. And now I think that's looking a lot nicer. And then to clear the mask, it's in here somewhere, Alt-M to clear a mask, like so. And I've sort of messed up this area a little bit, but I don't think it's too much of a problem. And I think that's resulted in a much nicer sort of sculpt in the end. And it seems like there's more mask residue over here or something that's going on. Just going to subtract those. I don't know why that happened. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because I haven't mentioned masking up until this point. I kind of actually forgot it existed. And it's really quite handy. And, you know, while you're sculpting, if you wanted to, you can always paint in some masks. Like, you know, we don't ever really want to distort these vents here or anything of the sort. So if you wanted to, you could just go ahead, paint a mask around these areas and just, you know, sort of tell Blender, hey, I never want to actually distort any of this. And that'll also save any, you know, accidents from occurring where, you know, you're sculpting, you're getting some really nice detail, and then, you know, you've just all of a sudden done one or two ominous brush strokes and it's like, oh, this area is all distorted and I never wanted to do that. This will just sort of help prevent that if you want to go set these up. I'll probably leave these here because I think it's handy, because I know in some of my practices I definitely did screw up these little vent pieces, and it is annoying because then you need to go back and redo everything. But yeah, just a nice little preventative measure there for you, but I'm just going to go back to the time lapse now for you. Alright, so this is what I've wound up with, and it's by no means perfect. It's probably a bit too much, and, some of the details are probably a bit muddy and don't really make a whole lot of sense, but, I'm not the most talented when it comes to doing these sorts of things, but, I think it holds up well enough. It's sort of got a bit of an artistic effect to it, but hopefully the process that I generally outlined, I've got no doubt that other people that are far more talented than myself are going to be able to take that and run with it and provide much better results. So I'm really keen to see what other people can do. But so with this done, let's just save it really quickly to make sure we don't lose all that work. But with all this done, what we're going to do now is we're going to do some very easy sort of retopology work on our low poly here. So I'm just going to grab the faceplate and actually what I'll do, easier. I'll just hide the helmet, well, all the parts that we didn't sculpt on, so pretty much just the faceplate and the main helmet. We'll just keep this, and then we'll bring in our low poly collection again. I'm just going to hide the high poly collection for a second. So we've already done the shrink wrap for our skull, and frankly, I think that's going to be enough because the skull's not really a significant portion of this asset. So I'm just going to apply the shrink wrap to the skull because I think that's going to be good enough in all honesty. And then with the faceplate here, I'm just going to L to select it, P and separate by selection. And then I'll get the rest of the helmet, which is all this. Cool. And what we're going to do is, so we're actually going to apply the mirror modifier. Normally we wouldn't do this until later in the process because we want to get as many mirrored UVs and all that. But since we've done all that sculpting, we've got a lot more unique areas of the helmet with all the damage and detail and whatever. So instead, we'll apply the mirror now and then we'll worry about all the UV unwrapping afterwards. So I'm just going to apply the mirror modifier. I'm probably right to apply the bevel. I mean, because we've still got this copy of the asset in our other file that we copied all this from. So I'm going to apply the bevel and I'm just going to get rid of the subdivision surface modifier. And what we'll do is we'll get a shrink wrap. And we should probably actually rename some of these high poly assets so that they make more sense. So let's go faceplate. Oops. Faceplate underscore HP for high poly. And we'll call this one helmet underscore HP so we know what it is. Cool. And I just want to unhide the faceplate HP. Cool. So let's turn that collection off. Actually, just the visibility. And bring our low poly back in. So similar to the skull, we're just going to shrink wrap this to our faceplate high poly. And so you can see that's done a little bit of the work for us. So it may not be completely apparent, but this part you can definitely see has indented a bit. So if we just toggle between these, you can kind of see it's sort of deformed the low poly mesh a bit, so it just marginally better fits the profile of the high poly sculpt. And before we apply this, we're going to do a little bit more work here with our low poly because we want to kind of model in all of those crevices and all that into our low poly mesh so that the depth is a lot more believable and it doesn't need to have the high poly mesh carry things as much. So I'm just going to select both of the high and low poly faceplates here. And then I'm just going to tab into edit mode on our low poly faceplate here. And I find this quite fun, because we don't need to do a whole lot of very meticulous work here. We can get away with doing some pretty cheap and nasty topology, which is kind of a fun change of pace from what we normally do. So let's try to do this area. And I know yours won't be the exact same as mine, and that's actually completely fine for the way that this part of the tutorial is going to work, because this should be pretty well adaptable to any sort of design or detail that you've sort of cut into your mesh. Actually, sorry, I'll change my mind. Let's apply the shrink wrap once, so we've sort of got that general base shape down, and then we'll do it again to the faceplate so that it's actually modified the positions of our vertices here. Cool. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to try to delete the vertices on the inside of this bit of detail here, or this bit of damage I should say. So I'm just going to select those three to start out with, so I'm just going to delete those vertices. And so now I'm sort of getting a better idea of what I'm looking at here. And quite simply, all I want to do, and I don't need to make this perfect or anything, but I just want to make a rough outline of topology. So, we've got a row of verts going down the middle here, and then sort of just very roughly and crudely connect everything back together with triangles, without triangles. for this part, it doesn't really matter because we are going to triangulate the low poly mesh. There's plenty enough detail in our high poly mesh to transfer those normals, so it doesn't really matter for this instance. And to make things a little bit easier, so I'm just going to turn the on cage on for our shrink wrap. I'm going to change our snap base to active and the snap target to face. And I'm just going to turn this magnet on, so it's just going to save us from having to press control when we do these. So I'm just going to kind of drag these verts here a little bit closer to the edge of this cutout of damage here. So I'm just going to kind of surround it a little bit. So just drag this down. And this might be getting a little bit too stretched. So instead I'm just going to extrude this vert and just bring it down to here. And then I'm just going to fill in a triangle there, which kind of goes against everything we were doing earlier. But it will work, trust me. And then I'm going to extrude this one. So this can just be at the top of everything. And that's gone horrifically wrong because I've connected it to the wrong thing. So let's just delete those faces and try that again. Do that, that's better. And then I'll fill in a quad there, and then I'll fill in a triangle there. And then down here, I can just extrude, so let's place a vertice down in this part of the crevice of the damage here. So fill that in, extrude another one here, fill that in. And so you can see, we're just making a very, very basic version. Oops. Yeah, you can see there. Very, very basic version of this damaged bit of detail here. Because then when we bake it, we'll get some of the smaller surface level details from the sculpt. But then when we have the shadows and all that cast from our lights, it'll actually cast back onto the topology itself, or the mesh itself, because it's not just normal detail, it's physical mesh. That's actually influencing this as well, so that's why we're doing this. And I think this is a lot of fun. It's really cool. It's probably a little bit more in line with actual game asset creation, I guess. I can't really speak because I'm a hobbyist, so I don't know what the proper standards are. But it's a method that I think works quite well, and I think it's a lot of bit of fun. So I'm just going to do these with 2 triangles at the end. So this is pretty crude in all honesty, but it's alright. I'm actually just going to use my knife tool. I'm just going to cut in some triangles at the bottom here and just readjust this triangle to just sit a little bit better in that crevice there. Cool, so that's literally the process. So I'm just going to go around and do that for the other parts that I've sort of cut into this. So once again, I'll probably just do a time lapse of this because I don't really want to waste everybody's time having to make you watch me do this meticulously time and time again. But that's the general process. I won't make it too fast so you can still follow what I'm doing sensibly, but just speed it up so that it's a little bit more time efficient for everybody. So I just thought this was important to mention. So I just sort of realized at the end here that I hadn't applied the mirror modifier before doing my retopology. So what I did is I actually went back to the original project file that we copied our model from and then brought that back in. And that's a really good benefit of why we actually split this into a separate project folder, so that if we did run into any issues such as I did just then, we can actually revert back to it and sort of have a bit of a save point to bring any mesh in if we need. So I just wanted to highlight that because it's an issue I ran into. Just in case anybody runs into something similar, there is a solution for it. So don't worry, it's not the end of the world if you do screw anything up in this process. that's pretty well done. And we just toggle the high poly off. So now you notice we've sort of got a low poly mesh that's kind of worse for wear when you look at the topology, but given the fact we're actually going to triangulate this whole thing, this actually works quite nicely. If you go look at game meshes or something of the sort with damage like this, this is kind of what they do. They probably have a little bit more methodology than what I just did, because I think some parts are probably a little bit maddening and a little bit strange. But it should work, and it will, from the practice I've done, it does bake down quite nicely into our normal maps. So yeah, but hopefully you enjoyed that process. If you want any more details on anything else, I'm happy to go over things again or do a separate tutorial even. As I know, I did speed up and time-lapse a fair bit of that, but that was just in the name of trying to show everybody, you know, the basic premise of what we were going to be doing for the sculpting and the retopology for the low poly modeling, and then sort of just speeding that up so you didn't have to follow what I was doing one-to-one, give you a little bit more creative liberty with doing your own take on the helmet and the damaging that you're doing to it. And then, you know, learn those principles and then try to apply them yourselves, because there's very little that can actually go wrong with this process. You know, it's pretty free form, and you sort of just get to make it up as you go a little bit, which is kind of fun. And I think I might have actually missed a little bit of... Oh no, I did get that. What was I saying? Yeah, it's a little bit more free form, and it's not as strict and restrictive as my other tutorials where we're doing subdivision surface modeling, and, you know, we've got to follow more strict guidelines on how we're getting our edge flow and topology set up. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that, but yes, please, if you struggled with anything, just let me know. Happy to help, and I'll see you all in the next one as we unwrap and bake all of our nice details down into normal maps.